first thing that I've been starting with everybody
Uh-huh.
on is that George Floyd video. And the first time you saw it, I guess first, did you watch it? And when you watched it, what was going through your mind?
I did watch the video, and a couple things impressed me. One is how cavalier the officer looked in terms of just of doing what he was doing. It wasn't as if he was nervous about being filmed. It wasn't as if he was concerned about what he was doing to George Floyd. None of those things were troubling to him. And the fact that, it's that obviously this is someone they had already subdued, so there was no need for it.
Was there anger? What was the emotion when you watched it?
One more time. Here we go, one more time. I think the thing for me about the George Floyd video is why now? Why have people suddenly decided to, maybe it's not so sudden, but to pay attention to George Floyd when they didn't pay attention to Philando Castile, when they didn't pay attention to Trayvon Martin, when they didn't pay attention to Tamir Rice, when they didn't pay attention to Sandra Bland, when they didn't pay attention to Michael Ferguson? All these cases have been happening. This is not anything new. Even here in Louisville, we had the shooting several years ago of the young man in the car. I think his last name was Randolph or Rudolph. I can't remember actually. But so what made this video so much more powerful? The tipping point. Yes. Why is this the tipping point? I mean, I was tipped a long time ago, so I don't know why now. I don't know what it is that people saw in this video that made them feel this is a bridge too far.
And I don't know if some of that was the complete cavalier attitude, if that was the tipping point. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm asking you that.
I don't know either. I think actually the cavalier attitude was one thing. But, frankly, I think the other thing is COVID. We were all stuck inside. We were not distracted. We were paying attention because we were desperately trying to pay attention to something other than the...
so the timing
was significant. I mean, how could you not be upset about Philando Castile sitting in his car with and killed in front of his girlfriend and the child? I mean, why would that not bother you? Why would that not bother you to see Walter Scott being shot in the back by the police officer years ago? I mean, so what was it about this other than the fact that maybe we were paying attention?
So now with the protests, then, you're saying you're surprised, I'm assuming, that this didn't happen a long time ago.
It should have happened a long time ago.
The protests that we're seeing now and the demands for racial equity.
And the thing to remember is that people have been protesting before. This is not the first protest. This is certainly one of the largest ones and the most diverse ones. But people were protesting the whole time. Sometimes we think of things in compartments as if the civil rights movement was from here to here and then stopped, or the women's movement was from here to here, or the LGBTQ movement was from here to here. But these things have been going on in terms of people raising concerns and trying to fight for equality and fairness the whole time.
As a judge, you can talk about the issues. Can you get out and protest? Would you? Or is that something you're not allowed to do as a judge?
I think to get out and protest probably would not be a move that most judges would take, because some of these matters may come before us. So you don't want to be in a position where you appear to have taken a position that would disqualify you from sitting on a case. So I think probably you would not be out protesting, but each judge will make that decision for him or herself.
But you obviously feel very strongly.
Oh, yeah. Well, what's happening is not something that happens to me from the standpoint of just my job. This happens in my life. My son was stopped and handcuffed and sat on the side of the curb because they said he had stolen a car, and he was driving my car and it wasn't stolen, and then they said, oh, well, you can go now. I mean, you know, I've had to tell my sons.
What year was that?
That was in 2005, the last
Here
time
in
he was
Louisville?
stopped. Yeah, in Louisville. I had to tell my sons growing up, be careful when you go into stores. Make sure that the clerk makes eye contact with you. Keep your hands where the clerk can see, because you don't know if they're going to accuse you of stealing. So, and other people I know, other friends I have, and family members. This whole the talk is all true, and you have to tell them that, because it is a dangerous world out there for black people, and particularly young black men. So you have to. I'm not looking at this in a vacuum. I'm not looking at this from the standpoint of some kind of judicial study or review. I'm looking at this because this is happening in my life, and I know that other people that it's happened to. And so this is something that, again, George Floyd wasn't a tipping point for me, but and I'm glad it seems to be a tipping point now, but why it's taken other people this long to get tipped? I don't know.
Because
why.
it's personal for you,
It's
obviously.
personal.
Well, let's talk about the legal system and turning a mirror on it, and let's talk about equity in the judicial system. Documentaries that I've watched, people I've talked to, a professor at U of L said, if you believe there's equity in the judicial system, you haven't looked closely enough. There isn't. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I mean, you think about, again, the judicial system is kind of the end of the game. Everything else has happened, and then people's cases are brought to court. And if you think about, and I'm paraphrasing, Plato said, that essentially for you to have justice in people's lives and in the course of conduct, and for this to be possible at all, it has to first reside in the hearts and souls of the citizens. This starts with all of us. The justice system is not standing there in a vacuum. So it has to start with all of us saying we want a just system. And some people are not as in tune with that. Some people are not as concerned with that. I do think it would be interesting if people would do what the John Rawls, who was a political philosopher, said in terms of this veil of ignorance. That is, what kind of economic, political, and social system would you want if you knew that you could be born anywhere in the world and you wouldn't know who you would be? So if you put yourself in that place, then you would decide what kind of system, what kind of laws do I want. So with the Racial Fairness Commission that we have with the Jefferson County Courts,
lead, correct?
That's what I lead, and with a lot of help from community leaders and from judges and attorneys and all, is that we examined 4 different areas of the court system. We started this in 2001, and we were asked to do 4 reports with recommendations, and we looked at jury selection, we looked at sentencing.
Is jury selection would be the diversity of jury pools?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We looked at jury selection, sentencing, that is, are there racial disparities in sentencing? We looked at the setting of bail, and we looked at courtroom environment. How do people feel? What are their perceptions coming into court? How are people saying they're treated? And we issued reports on all of those topics.
Well, let me get back to that. What was the most glaring thing that you all found? Was it bail? Was it diversity in jury pools? Which one was it that you thought, boy, we've got to change this immediately?
Well, we found disparity in every area that we looked. So the idea
It wasn't just one overriding.
It wasn't one overriding. I mean, we saw that there was some disparity in sentencing. That is, that we could not account for other than race in terms of black males particularly getting a harsher sentence. And we only looked at a couple of limited areas because you have to have enough cases to make a statistical analysis of that.
Any changes come from those reports?
Well, yes. Well, one we just finally got years ago. I mean, we've been issuing.
Did you say finally?
Finally, on one thing, this year the legislature finally added state-issued ID to the master juror list, before is you were selected for jury service if you either had a driver's license, you paid income taxes, or voter registration. Now, even if you don't have a driver's license, a state-issued ID would be enough to also put you on the jury master list, or a possibility of
So
being
that would get
called.
more diversity.
We hope that will get more diversity. We don't know. We did ask for that. I think that was way back in 2006, so we'll see.
So what, but I have to say, because you said finally, so I'm using your words on you. What's taking so long?
Well, that was a legislative change, and we couldn't do anything about that in the court system. We had to wait for the legislature to act, and there have been other times where a state legislator did push forward that possibility, and I think this year, as in before, I think it was Senator Jerry Neal who did that.
But you did say, so I guess how good is the court system to see its reflection in the mirror, and obviously a compromise system? Are people receptive to change?
Well, I think they are. I mean, the good thing about our Racial Fairness Commission, we've had judges on this commission, and the judges know sitting there that if anybody's about to be criticized, it's going to be them. But they've been willing to participate and offer suggestions for change and things they would like to know also. So one thing that has happened is that the Court of Justice now does implicit bias training and cultural competency. And that's done for the district court judges, circuit court judges, the Court of Appeal judges. It's open to Supreme Court justices. All of us have opportunity to get that training. I'm encouraged to do that and do it at our various education conferences. With our last year, we had a community listening session. And one of the things the judges said to me was, I'd like to know when I sentence people and I grant them probation, what works? What makes them be able to follow the terms of probation? So that I can make sure that if this is something that is workable, that I can order it more. Because usually judges will only see those cases when something goes wrong. When a person doesn't comply, they don't see the cases where the person does the right thing and never comes back to court. So it's like, we need to know what works. So, I mean, I think, I appreciate the fact that judges have been willing to be the brunt of some of the criticism. We were critical of judges in our report on bail and making sure that bail was set fairly or no bail if necessary. We have worked with the bail project initially on for no bail.
That's been a huge issue.
Yes, it has. It has. We worked with pretrial services on the fact that at least, and this has improved over the years, but again, we've been doing these. We did these reports starting 20 years ago, literally now. But you know, looking at the fact that when they were calling in to verify someone should be released, so they talked to their family members or friends. If they called into a household where English wasn't spoken, that was a real disadvantage for that particular defendant. So we were looking at, okay, this is not. Initially, the racial fairness was looking really at the issue what happens with African Americans, but not surprisingly, as we started looking into it, it wasn't just African Americans. Other marginalized groups. Poverty is a big deal. Poverty,
absolutely.
Money talks, and if you don't have it.
Attorneys,
yes,
and being able to hire. How would you rate, I guess, your satisfaction with the changes that have been made with the committee that you lead? Are you pleased with it? You're okay with it? Not pleased? It hasn't been fast enough? How would you couch it?
Well, I would say it's not been fast enough. But again, some of those changes are outside of
your jurisdiction.
The Court of Justice couldn't change it. The Racial Fairness Commission was first begun by then Chief Justice Joe Lambert, and has been continued under the term of Chief Justice John Minton. So the Court of Justice and the Chief Justice has always been supportive of the project and encouraged the project. And when we had a report to issue, the Chief Justice usually showed up to receive feedback, comment, in addition to what was in the report. So fortunately, we've had a Court of Justice that understands that we have not done everything as well as we should have.
If you had a person of color entering the system charged with the same crime, let's say, as a white man, is that person of color going to get a fair shake?
Well, we certainly hope they get a fair shake, and I think a lot of things, depending on why they're entering the system, could impact that. First, let me just though say that people undervalue the public defender's office. They think I must be, if I don't hire a private attorney, that somehow I'm not getting the best representation. Public defender's office does a great job.
Well, there's one in particular I know who does a heck of a
Yes,
job.
yeah.
But we're talking about plea deals, making bail, some of those.
Some of that, and again, some of it's a function of money. Some of it may be race, but some of it's money.
Where you said poverty.
Yes, poverty is a big deal. So let's say that there is a bail set for you and you can't post it. You're then in custody before you've even had a trial. A plea bargain may look really good to you so you can get out of jail. So you may end up plea bargaining not because you have made or the attorney has made an assessment that your case is such that this is a good deal, but because you feel as if you have no alternative. We know that 3 days count in terms of people's ability to go on with their lives. If you're in jail for 3 days, in 3 days people can lose their jobs, therefore lose their house, and perhaps even lose temporarily custody of their children. So we know getting people through the system is significant. So the poverty issue is something that the court system is trying to address. So as to whether the black defendant would get a fair deal, yes, the black defendant could get a fair deal, but it depends on some other variables such as maybe income.
And let's talk about with the protesters. I mean, it is from the police department to the judicial system, all of the above. It seems to me you have a deep understanding of all of this frustration that is playing out on the streets of Louisville.
Yes, well, I mean, I'm frustrated too. So yes, I understand the basis for the protest. And the thing to remember about our society, about the court system, about laws, is that, you know, sometimes we want to make laws very logical and rational, and this is why we do stuff. And, you know, and if there's a quote by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes that says, "The life of the law is not logic, it's experience." Somehow, when people have a different experience, when people have a different perception, things change. You know, and we've seen this time and time throughout history. I mean, as you probably know, women were property. Women could not own their own property. Women could not contract. Women could not have credit.
Couldn't get a credit card not all that long ago.
That's right.
Yes,
you could not get a credit card. So what changed? Why? And what changed was, I think, the perception of people in charge. Their perceptions changed because something made them change. Something made them look at it differently. You know, what changed from Plessy versus Ferguson when you had actually it's equal but separate but equal doctrine, and then Brown versus Board of Education. What changed? Perception changed.
And maybe we're in the middle of that perception change.
That's
we
right.
can only hope. So let me ask this, because this comes, you know, after the passing of John Lewis, who
Yes.
was known for making good trouble.
Yes.
So what do you say to that? Because, I mean, people were saying we've been making good trouble here in Louisville, and we've been tear gassed, we've been pelted with rubber bullets. How do you rationalize all of that?
Well, the whole idea of civil disobedience is that you know that you may be violating the law, but you are willing to take the punishment because of the larger and greater cause. So just as we saw, and this is not to this extreme, I don't mean to say that, but just as we saw demonstrators beaten in the civil rights movement, we saw the water hoses, we saw the dogs attack, we saw all that in response to civil disobedience. I can't say that I'm surprised that sometimes our response has been with the tear gas and with the other things. I don't think that that's something that necessarily should happen, but it depends, I guess, on the circumstances. So I'm not really able to totally speak to that. But civil disobedience carries with it the knowledge that there is a penalty that you will pay for the greater
And we
good.
know how many penalties John Lewis
Oh,
paid.
yes, yes.
So what would you say, and I, forgive me for doing this to you, but as a person of the law, if your son came to you and said, Mom, I'm going to go make good trouble.
That's okay. My brother did that. My brother protested. My brother, by the way, now is deceased, so I can make fun of him a lot. But he did. He protested. My parents were concerned about his safety. Actually, inadvertently, I took part of a protest when I was about 6. I didn't know I was protesting, but my older cousin took me to a lunch counter for a sit-in, and I didn't really understand what was happening. So that was my
Your introduction.
My introduction to it. But we weren't arrested. We just left when we were told to leave. But so I think people have to find their own way, and every method has a certain significance and meaning and advantage to it. I think sometimes the law itself or the lawmakers don't pay attention until there is something that draws their attention to it.
Let me go with that because I didn't realize till I was doing a little homework, your grandfather, Atwood Wilson, was a civil rights activist to a degree, right?
Yes, yes.
So does this come, is it in your genes?
I don't think it's in my, I don't know if it's in my genes. It'd be nice if it were in my genes. And his way of protesting was to work basically through the system. I mean, he helped desegregate the libraries, and of course all of his work at Central High School, where he's principal for 29 years. He always told us that we had an obligation to give back. And we were fortunate, and we had an obligation, and he was not, and even though he was highly educated, he believed that whatever you did, whatever your level of education, whatever your position is that you just have to be the best you can be. And that's what your responsibility is.
I've looked at some of your personal achievements and make sure I got this right. First black woman to serve on Kentucky Court of Appeals?
Yes,
First black woman to be Kentucky Circuit Judge?
yes.
And I'm sure there are more. So there are a lot of firsts that come before your name. What do you think about that?
I think that I think it's nice. I appreciate the acknowledgement, but truthfully, there were people who were skilled and capable of doing this way before I got here. And I think it's unfortunate they didn't get the opportunity. When I think, for example, of my parents and my grandparents, they did everything they could to prepare themselves for a life or a career, but they often didn't get the opportunity to use what they had learned. And it is so admirable to me that in spite of the fact they had no idea whether or not they'd ever be able to use the skill and training and education they had, they got it anyway.
Wow.
Why? But they did. And so, so I think that although again, it's nice that I'm first, they were really first way before me.
So did you wake up one day and say, I want to be a judge? I mean, because I was thinking, if you're the first at all of these things, who was your role model?
Yeah, no, I didn't want to be a judge at all. So it never really occurred to me to be a judge. This was something that actually I feel like I was kind of meandered into a little bit. And frankly, it was because other people thought that I had to be good at it. I didn't necessarily think I would be good at it.
What did they see in you that they thought, Denise, judge?
I'm not sure what
Were
they
you fair?
also.
Was fairness a big deal?
I think part of it was they thought I could see both sides.
Ah.
I think that was part of it. And actually, the first person that told me that I should at least be a lawyer was my godmother, who told me that when I was picketing her yard because I didn't think her punishment with her her daughter, who was my friend, was fair.
Wait a minute, you picketed?
I picked it. I was marching around. And they, you know, the
How old
adults,
were you?
Oh, I don't know, about 10 or so.
Wow.
And the adults came out to watch and kind of smile and laugh at me, I guess. Well, laugh with me, maybe. But she said, you know, really, you really ought to be a lawyer. And I thought, okay, but I just put that on the back burner. But I think that, you know, some of my friends and colleagues who encouraged me just thought that I could hear the other side. And one thing you learn by being a judge, and I didn't know this growing up because I wasn't this way, but what you learn by being a judge is not to be judgmental. Because you don't know why sometimes people are doing what they are doing. You're not really judging, really, to me, their character. You're just saying this act that you committed was wrong. Or if it's a civil suit, you violated the statute here, or you didn't comply with the contract. You're not judging their character, their
whole
essence.
being.
Yeah, you know, I used to, and sometimes in criminal cases, when I was sentencing someone, you know, the family would get up to speak and they would say, well, you know, he is really a good guy. He takes his grandmother to the grocery store. He watches his little sister, whatever. I believed everything they said. It wasn't a matter that I didn't believe. It's just a matter that the law said I have to impose a sentence. So what I came to believe by sitting there as a trial judge is that we all do things that we have no business doing. Most people, I don't think, are really what we would define as evil or lost souls. They have stumbled on the wrong path, and sometimes those mistakes are so critical that they end up totally altering their lives and not for the good. Sometimes, and I've had defendants tell me this too, their stumble helped them get where they needed to be. So I think that, you know, you sit there, you think, wow, that could have been me, or that could have been my son, or that could have been whomever. And so I learned that, again, I'm not judging their essence. I'm just looking at to see whether or not there's compliance.
So if I had to say, what would be the one quality you would say would make a good judge, what would it be?
I would say, well, again, we're not being judgmental. I would say patience, which I really don't have a lot of, but I learned to develop it. My mother told me when I was little, if I didn't learn to develop patience, I would die, literally, because I was so impatient. So I learned over the years to develop some, but part of me really is still that, let's hurry up and get this done kind of thing. But I do, and I think the willingness, I'm sorry, this is not one thing, the willingness to listen to people. I think you have to be willing to listen. I think you have to be willing to learn. You know, lawyers are there to educate the court. So they make arguments not just to be persuasive, but to make sure the judge knows and understands that this is something that is important, this law, this case, this whatever. So I think that the ability to listen and to be patient and to, again, in cases not to be judgmental, I think all those things are helpful.
You talked about listening, and I'm sure you've been listening to what the protesters are saying and things that are being said in our community. So based on that, where are you finding hope in anything that you've heard? Are you finding hope in what's happening around us right now?
Yeah. You know, I think James Baldwin said something like, if you didn't have hope, what's the point, kind of thing. I think you have to have hope, and hope is not a wish. Hope has more substance than that. It's taking something, to me, concrete, to some extent. What you see, that is that there's a path. And even though you have no idea if it's going to happen or when it's going to happen, that it can happen. And I think the fact that so many people, perhaps, who were not as engaged before are engaged now, that makes me have hope. And I think the fact that some of our legislators and other politicians are listening, that makes me have hope. But I do think we have to act fairly quickly, because I think people are easily distracted, and when something else comes along, they may venture off into something else. because all these issues have been here. You know, these are not new issues, and the fact that some people are just now awake to them is we have to make sure they stay awake. So we have to do something to change it in the moment that we have.
Let me ask, because you said people should have been tipped a long time ago.
I think so.
And I've said that in many of these interviews that I have done, and I think that's where white privilege comes in. You're not inherently aware, and you haven't been paying attention, and I think I'm guilty of that. But I think, like you're saying, with each thing and listening and being taught, now is the time to listen. So change for the better when we get on, because everybody's saying this is uncomfortable, and I've had people say, good. I've been uncomfortable for many years.
I'm not uncomfortable with people being uncomfortable.
So that, are we hoping in this discomfort that this is where change is going to happen?
I think so. I think people have to be uncomfortable. I mean, you know, we sometimes want a world where everybody's comfortable and secure, at least within our particular world, although we know worldwide that is not the case anyway. But I think it's only through that discomfort that people have any incentive to change. If you're already comfortable, why would you change? So you have to be uncomfortable, and I think conversations have to be harsh. I think people will have their feelings hurt in conversations. I think one thing that history teaches us is that human behavior is such that this has to be done over and over and over again. We never get it. It's never ingrained. One slip one way, then we're off on a different track. So I think it has to be ever before us. Just as, you know, the Holocaust is always before us, or slavery, it has to be, because we will forget very quickly.